We got invited to the World Economic Forum as the Girls Lounge. And, you know, people always say, the Girls Lounge? Women don't want to be called girls. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Men have no problem calling it the Boys Club. Like, why is there this problem with us calling it the Girls Lounge? And, you know, women have not felt comfortable in the Boys Club. But every man feels comfortable in a Girls Lounge. And the Girls Lounge started as a place where the minority acts and feels like the majority. Men are welcome, but they are the minority, coming into our home with our rules. And when you flip the balance and talk about representation, when you have representation at the table changes. The table gets better. It really does. And when we got invited to Davos, the World Economic Forum with leaders, I was told, we want you to come from the World Economic Forum. We welcome you, but people might not like you there. That's what I was told. And I'm like, okay, I'm coming. Thank you for that wonderful, lovely invitation. And what do you do when you're afraid? You call your girlfriends and you say, come with me. And if people don't want to come to the Equality Lounge at the World Economic Forum, who the hell cares? We'll have each other. We'll drink rosé all day together, and that's just okay. And one of the most beautiful girlfriends that I invited was my dear girlfriend, Jennifer. And we showed up. We're going on year 4, but year 1, we showed up. We didn't know what to expect. And we just opened shop and started talking about diversity. Diversity is good for business, how we're going to change the equation, how, you know, we're going to start, you know, bringing more representation across the board. And lo and behold, people started showing up. Next thing you know, by day 2, we were invited to everyone's parties. And they rolled out the red carpet. And by year 2, we doubled our space. By year 3, we quadrupled our space. And today, at the World Economic Forum, the Girls Lounge is the home of equality, and we are the #1 go-to destination in Davos. So, what will it take? What will it take? It will take us being bold. What will it take? It will take us being brave. What will it take? It will take us being fearless. What will it take? It will take power of the pack. When you put women in any equation, the equation gets better. And when we have at least 30% minimum representation at any table, that's when culture transforms. Not 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. A woman alone has power. Collectively, we have impact. Look at what you have here. I just came from Africa, helping build schools for girls. 12-year-old girls in the Masai Mara are not allowed to get an education because they have chores, schlepping water miles, walking barefoot on cobblestone. Men don't even know where the wells are. Women get raped along the way. If they drop an ounce of water, they kill themselves on the side of the road. This is reality today. But guess what's happening now? The mamas are uniting and creating a pack, and they're creating a community. And there's now 580 mamas that are insisting that girls get an education. So we're moving wells closer to their homes so they can do their chores early in the morning. Girls at the age of 12, their bodies get cut. They get married to very, 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 very old men. And they're one of 5 wives. But if girls get an education, they can bypass that process. And the mamas are the ones that are now starting to create this voice together. And those voices are now leading the elderly men, because these men don't even know how to fetch water. They don't know how to take care of children. They don't even know how to build a fire. So if these mamas, 584 women strong, start defining the rules, guess what happens? The rules change. What will it take? That is what tonight is all about. What will it take? It will take us uniting. It will take us standing up. It will take us standing out. It will take us standing together. When we are together, using our voices, using our strength, using our power, using our individuality collectively, we are unstoppable. So please welcome Marianne Schnall, who has created a company called What Will It Take? What will it take to get the first female president? What will it take to get more women in media? What will it take to get more women in politics? What will it take to have more representation at the table? Please welcome my very dear friend, Marianne.
Well, first of all, thank you. Does that sound okay? Sorry. So much, Shelley, for graciously hosting us in your beautiful home and for all of the incredible work that you do to support and empower women and girls all over the world. So huge gratitude to you and to your whole Female Quotient team for everything that you did to make this event possible. So huge thanks. Yes. I would also like to thank my very dear friend and colleague, Jennifer Siebel Newsom. I first met Jen when I interviewed her for probably, I think, Women's Media Center and Huffington Post about her very powerful film, Misrepresentation, which yes, please. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. And I'm very, very excited about all the different ways that I am partnering with the Representation Project and also the Representation Project team, which is a partner on this event. Many of her team are here tonight, and it's always been a joy to work with them, and we'll tell you more about the campaign that we have that we're about to launch in a little bit later in the program. I wanted to first just give a context to this event today, because it's part of a whole journey, a sort of journey that I didn't even anticipate that came out of my book, which is What Will It Take to Make a Woman President? Conversations about Women Leadership and Power. And it began from just this sort of very honest, simple question from my 8-year-old daughter, Lotus. After Barack Obama was elected president, we were talking about how remarkable it was to have our first African-American president. And she just turned to me and she was like, well, why haven't we ever had a woman president? And it was just one of those sort of like woke you up, like, yeah, like why haven't we ever had a woman president? And I was covering an event and I decided to weave it into my questions, why haven't we had a woman president? What will it take? And it was for an article at CNN. It got so much attention that the next thing I knew, I was doing a book on this. And really looking at why, not just do we not had a woman president, why do we not have more women in positions of leadership in politics across all sectors? And I decided we need to look at that from like a lot of different angles and perspectives. So in my book, which we are offering, you can take one on your way out. It has interviews with everybody from Jen to Maya Angelou to Sheryl Sandberg to Anita Hill to Melissa Etheridge to Nicholas Kristof to Melissa Harris Perry. I just went to everybody. Yeah. Well, people wanted to be part of this conversation. And it was really like fascinating because it really is this question, why we haven't had more women leaders, is a lens into so many different issues that affect women, politics, diversity, all sorts of different issues. And then when the book was about to come out, I decided I just didn't want to write a book. I wanted to use the book to launch a platform to make sure that I was also uplifting all of the organizations and programs that work to advance women's leadership, because more and more I feel like events and content should be linked to like tools, strategies, and resources. And so that is what Will It Take is. You can find out more at whatwillittake.com. It's really a movement to inspire a new generation of women leaders, and it's meant to be a connective tissue amongst all of the different, voices and organizations that are working in the various sectors of women's leadership, and then cross-sector conversations, because there's a lot of the same challenges and opportunities to advance women's leadership across all sectors. And as I had done a series of launch events. Jen and Gavin were part of the launch that I did in San Francisco. I saw events as being a great way to have these conversations, create community. And I wrote this piece that was called, it was first another CNN article. It was 2018 will be the year of women. And that was it was like my form of therapy, because with all the concerning things that are going on in this world, I wanted to highlight really the positive signs that I saw. So, millions of people across the world marching for the Women's March. 30,000 women stepping up to run for office, Me Too and Time's Up, and all these conversations we're having about race and power and privilege. So I wanted to us to feel like a narrative emerging. And then to my amazement, that article got so shared so widely by all kinds of groups and all kinds of influencers, and that it seemed like people wanted to plug into this Year of Women. So I am launching this Year of Women. It's a digital and event and media campaign. I'm partnered on this Year of Women campaign with a great family of brands that I'm a part of Intentional Media, Conscious Company Media, SoCap, and Good Capital Project. So that we can elevate women in business, politics, finance, and media. And this is one of 5 What Will It Take events that I have as part of Year of Women. We're taking on, this is women in media, I have women in politics, women in sports, women in money, women in wellness. There's a lot of important conversations to be had. And as for this first one, for this Women in Media, thank you all for being here, because honestly, this was really sort of curated because of the fact that you all represent important voices, organizations, programs that are working in various different lanes around women's media. And what I'm really trying to do is to start a community to help me build this Women in Media initiative. I want to build towards doing a bigger event next year. I'm doing an online platform. I want to, have all the most important organizations represented there, statistics, content, tools, strategies. So I hope that you will, engage with me, sign up to the What Will It Take mailing list, and just continue to be a part of this conversation, because I really want to do this to serve all of the great work that is being done. I want to first introduce my very esteemed panel. These are really an incredible set of minds and backgrounds and skills and expertise. First, I will start with Caroline Heldman. She is a political science professor at Occidental College. She is the research director of the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media and a survivor advocate. And next is Brenda Robinson. She is an entertainment attorney, a philanthropist in the arts and entertainment community, and sits on several boards, including USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and the Representation Project. And of course, the amazing Jennifer Siebel Newsom, a renowned filmmaker, advocate, and CEO and founder of the Representation Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to gender equality and to gender justice. So to begin with, Jen and we've partnered on a lot of things, and we wanted to start by telling you, because this is probably our first official announcement of this campaign. We've partnered together on a campaign called What Will It Take to Represent Her? And so I'm going to throw it over to Jen to have her tell you all what will it take to represent her is and why it is important.
So, it's obvious, what will it take, right? What will it take to have a female president? What will it take to have more women in leadership across various sectors and industries? The representer side is the beautiful synergy and opportunity in partnership is really that I respect Marianne's work so much, and we saw at the Representation Project an opportunity to really remind people of the value of women, of women's priorities, of women's needs, of the need for more feminist thinking in leadership, whether it be politics or business or entertainment or religion, you name it. It goes on and on and on. And so for me, what will it take to represent her is kind of twofold. It's what will it take to get more women at the highest echelon of leadership and seats at the tables of power, and simultaneously, what will it take to represent women's needs, women's voices, women's concerns, women's interests? And we have a long ways to go. I think, fortunately, we have some incredible men who are in leadership, and we have some incredible women in leadership who are fighting the good fight in business, in entertainment, in politics, et cetera, but clearly we have a long ways to go. And so this is really an opportunity to really wake people up, to shift consciousness, and ultimately to shift attitudes and behaviors around the value of women and around the value of women in leadership and what leadership could really look like if we achieved 50-50 or somewhere close to that very soon.
And so what we are launching is a video campaign. We had the great fortune, we decided that one way to get people's attention would be to just get different people talking about why it's important to have more women in leadership, as well as why it's important to get out and vote, just use our voices. And so there at the United States of Women Summit, we were able to interview everybody from Dolores Huerta to Valerie Jarrett to Pat Mitchell to Sophia Bush to Ai-jen Poo. It was like the who's who of just incredible women, and some Larry Wilmore is part of it. And so it'll be connected to an online hub, and we'll be launching this in the next month or so. And we're hoping to start a conversation and a movement around this. So anyway, moving on to, why we're here today in terms of talking about, just the tie-in between why it's so important in terms of media today. And I mean, in fact, I think that is like what I would want to even start with, because I think sometimes we think of these things sort of amorphously and we don't really think about what are the ramifications of not having greater representation and diversity of in media to the advancement of gender equality. So, I'll throw that to Jen, but to anybody else who would also want to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, right, we all know media is the message and the messenger. It's the greatest cultural communicator of our time. And because we create media, we have the opportunity to recreate it in a form and in a fashion that is representative, because we know it's historically not been representative of all of our voices, right? Of all of our values, of all of our stories. And so that's what's so exciting about being a part of awakening consciousness in media, is that if we can really shift representation behind the camera, we can shift it in front of the camera, and then we can shift the portrayals and the stories and the values, which ultimately is affecting individuals' hearts and minds on a daily basis, especially our young people, our children, whose brains aren't fully formed until they're in their late 20s. You know that the media has been sending really limiting messages to our boys about their value being in power and dominance and aggression, just as we know the media has been sending really limiting messages to our girls about their value lying in their youth, their beauty, and their sexuality. So we have this tremendous opportunity to rewrite that narrative and create a narrative that's more inspiring and empowering and reflective of who we all truly are.
The way I see it, it requires a mentality shift that starts right at home, starts among us as sisters forming alliances. And I want to talk about that tonight. A lot of this movement, it does focus on how we as women can combine, collaborate, and not hold each other back, frankly. But I also think about the men who are the allies that we need to move this forward. I think that's very important. I can say personally that I've gotten through so many things in life and excelled because I had strong, not just mentors, but sponsors. There's a difference. When you speak about what diversity really means, it's not just having mentors, people to sort of provide guidance, but it's having sponsors, people who take a personal interest in your professional development. I actually have one of my sponsors here tonight, Fred Fenster, and I point him out. First of all, the fact that he's here, I invited a lot of people. He's the one who showed up. He always shows up. And I want to acknowledge him for that because he's one of our friends. He's here because this is important to him. He and his wife, Andrea, have been very supportive of our initiatives. We need examples like that. But I want us as women to recognize that. that it comes from within us, forming alliances, and also finding our allies on the other side.
So I'll just inject some data for that question. So we know that media has this profound impact, right? That the narratives that we see mostly in entertainment media, they shape who we're supposed to love, who we're not supposed to love, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, what our values should be, how we should spend our time. They shape basically our core identity. And so at the end of the day, we have very little research on impact, but a few studies have come out recently that really confirm this conventional wisdom. One was a study looking at why the heck so many little girls decided to take up archery in 2016. So we went in, we asked and said, did Katniss Everdeen or Princess Merida, which both came out in 2012, have any effect? And sure enough, 63% said that these, either one or both of them were their role models in terms of going into that. Also a recent study on the Scully effect, which again, conventional wisdom, we know that there's this effect. We assume it's common knowledge, very little data, but indeed we found that young women who grew up watching the X-Files in the 90s were about a quarter more likely, which is huge in a study like this, more likely to go into STEM. And in fact, 61% of women in a STEM field said that Dana Scully inspired them to go into that profession. And so we see these profound effects, which is why it matters so much that this idea of what you can be, whether or not you see it on the screen, just to provide some stats here, only 29%. So if women are 51% of the population. We're 29% of the leading characters in entertainment media. We're 37% of the major characters. And we know that in film and in television that men appear twice as often as women, and men speak twice as often as women. And when we're talking about the erasure of women, it's really important to point out that women of color are virtually erased, that queer women are virtually erased, that women with disabilities are virtually erased. So anytime we're talking about these numbers, it is even worse when you have marginalized identities that intersect, right? When you have more than one marginalized identity, you tend to just be absent. And I'll just end by saying that one study on women's leadership, looking at the impact of that, we know that it took about 40 years of entertainment media normalizing a black president in order for opinion polls to be accepting of that, right? And I am not arguing that there's not a bias against a black president or a president of color who is a man. Of course, there's an obvious bias. I would, get political and say that maybe we have Donald Trump as president in response to 8 years of our first black president. And I'm looking forward to the backlash after our first female president. Got to be honest, I want the backlash. I'm waiting for it. But women have only been shown as presidents or commanders-in-chief for about the last 18 years. So if you're looking at how the amount of time it took to normalize a black president on the big and little screens, we're still, in terms of the power of media, we're still about 20 years out in terms of normalizing that.
Yeah, and by the way, also a reminder of the power we have as consumers to support the the media that we want to see, and then also one of the things, just to build on some of the things that were said, that I heard a lot in my book was about transforming the portrayal of women in the media, particularly the portrayal of female leaders, which are often depicted in such negative, sexist ways. And that really does have an impact on how we view those leaders, women and men. So that is needing to speak out, which I think there's been more of an outcry against that type of sexist coverage. And then the other thing, building on what Brenda said about the importance of including men in this, and that is why, and obviously Jen has done such important work in that space, and why I always make sure to try to have men interviewed in the book. This is not a women's issue. This is a human issue. Right. We all benefit from a more diverse world, and by having, I think that is one of the biggest, most important points. This gets so marginalized, and I think it's really important that we reframe it that way. So I just wanted to add that. Just thinking through, because, where we are now, a question about, in terms of the representation of women in media, what change have you seen in the last, let's say, half century? And I guess, and what is just staying the same and stagnating? Where are signs of hope, and where do we really need to be pushing?
Just thinking about the way that corporations respond to the question, and the way that, politicians who are currently in office respond. I'm thinking about a recent example where Mattel came out with a female president, vice president, Barbie. Now, I myself, by the way, am a Barbie collector. I have over 150 dolls at home. They're all in the box. But the reason why I have so many Barbies is because growing up, my parents gave me 2 of each of the same Barbie, one in black and one in white. So I wouldn't have to choose. So it's just a little tweak, little mentality tweaking there, so that you understand, we're all the same. You don't need to go. And it's nice. I celebrate going into a store and seeing something that looks like you, celebrating that. But I was taught also to appreciate all the other differences. And so you see now things like this happening where, a lot of children obviously have been born into an age where they only knew an African-American president. And, the time that was happening in 2008, they were looking at behavioral, responses to the fact that there was a minority that was, in office. And they found that among young African-American boys that they were behaving better in school. Some of the, more underserved areas, they noticed that shift because they could see and conceive of it. What you think about now is the fact that there's so much that we can control in that regard. Whether it's dealing with gender roles in films, violence in films, people see it and they accept it as the model. And this is how we become, a more productive society. So we think about, this is possible and I can keep going. And I think it's important that, it doesn't come just from us. It comes from corporations, of people who are in a position to actually be truly impactful. That's their responsibility. I think there's a business imperative and there's a moral imperative to make sure that you're actually actively shaping what we see.
I would just briefly add that we have seen almost stagnant representation in the last half a century, with the exception of female leads. We've actually seen them go up from it was 12 to 13% in the early 2000s. By 2004, it was up to 16%. So since that time, it's gone up to 30%. So we have seen some improvement, and I would like to acknowledge the organizations that have been a part of that, right? So I think Geena Davis Institute maybe was the earliest in 2006, but Martha Lausen started around the same time at San Diego at the Center for Women in Television and Film, and Stacy Smith then went on to head up the Annenberg Initiative, and now Darnell Hunt is doing the diversity report out of UCLA. So all of these projects are important. They're public data projects, but I really want to highlight the representation project because I think it actually moved the needle. It's hard to compare this, but I think its broad appeal and the fact that misrepresentation and the mask you live in have such wide crossover appeal outside of, just the folks who are reading the data, outside of all of the, thousands of educational institutions that have used these materials. It's gone wide, it's gone global, it's gone to millions of people, not just in the US, but across the globe. And I think that the impact of those films has really shifted the debate and really focused on this in a way that data simply, on its own, simply could not.
No. I paid her to say that. And to continue that conversation around representation, if women are still 9% of directors in feature films, looking at the top 250 grossing films in the past year. Like, that's not progress, right? When we're 51% of the population. I think that number's kind of gone, it's danced up and down since the 90s, right? I could be off, but that is not progress. And so, and then let's remember that you can't just have one woman at the top or one woman with a seat at the table. You know, how many women have been nominated for Academy Awards as directors, as writers, as editors, as producers? There are exceptions to the rule, and we want to celebrate those and cheer them on. But again, you can't just have one woman with a seat at the table of power. You've got to have that tipping point of change. And so, and money, unfortunately, is not in the hands of women. And to take this out of the media, or to broaden it beyond media, if you look at just income or salary disparities, we know they exist in Hollywood. We've read all the stories. Is it any wonder that we have the wealth gap that we have in the United States of America for women, whereby white women own 33 cents on the white man's $1 of wealth, and African American and Latina women own 1 and 2 cents on the white man's $1 of wealth? So again, we have a long ways to go, because money, unfortunately, as you were sharing earlier, Shelley, dictates advertising, dictates placement and programming and opportunity. And we know that we still don't pay our women enough. We know that there are so many talented women out there that don't have representation at the top agencies. We know that we aren't paying women equitably and reinforcing and providing security for them in their careers. And then let's not forget that we as a society don't have the policies in place that would enable working women to raise children while having a very, how would I describe it? Just a prolific career, right? So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to paid leave, when it comes to universal preschool, when it comes to childcare, and I get the structural impediments in the entertainment industry. Given that, when I was working in entertainment, some days I would be on set till 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. And that would have been hard had I had children then. I understand that. But I just think there's more we can do. And I think it requires men of consciousness in leadership, advocating for real systemic change. And it requires more women in leadership, more women being sponsored into leadership, right? Such that we can really create a huge paradigm shift, one that we haven't seen yet, but I think we're on the verge of seeing. And I will just end this with the positive, which is I'm super inspired by and impressed with what's happening in TV. I think we clearly have a long ways to go when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but I know that that's where we're starting to see more activity in terms of inclusivity and representation. And so if we can just keep marching in that direction, I think that good things are going to happen. But again, it's going to require more and more of us to demand that it happens. So it demand the inclusion riders, demand the equal pay, and it requires our allies to have our back.
I mean, that's the broader question, right? Which is, what are we up against? I think that most of the time when we're talking about gender justice, we don't actually acknowledge what we're up against because we don't like the word and it's too theoretical. We're up against patriarchy, and it is the oldest form of oppression. All right. Right? And it's not just on its own, right? It's a white supremacist, heterosexist, ableist patriarchy. Let's make sure that we talk about this in all of its complexities. But at the end of the day, patriarchy is simply a society where we value men and what they do more than women and what they do. And the evidence of this is overwhelming. And I don't blame boys and men, right? They're born into a culture where this is what they learn. I think it's very similar to a white person being born in the United States. I think it is very difficult to not have some deep-seated racism and bigotry if you were born into a white supremacist culture. It's the same thing. It's a process of socialization. You learn it before you're conscious of being conscious. It doesn't mean that you're not responsible for it and the outcomes of it as an adult, and especially once you recognize it. It's a constant struggle. It's one that takes a whole lifetime. But at the end of the day, that is what we're up against. And I think that it's really, so we just talking briefly about it's not organic for gender roles. Our gender roles are constructed, right? They shift over time, they shift rapidly, they shift by culture, they shift by subculture. There's nothing natural or neutral about gender roles. There's nothing natural or neutral about the fact that we use gender to organize our lives in ways that are non-meritorious, and we do it all the time, and we've accepted that. But at the end of the day, we raise our little boys to really, to view their bodies as tools to master their environment. We raise our little girls to think of their bodies as projects that will never be finished. We will never like our meat bag, right? We will never be happy with our bodies, and that is the state of being a woman or girl or woman in the United States. But for men, even something more profound, they are asked when they're little boys to develop their core identity based upon rejecting everything that is feminine, right? So it's not organic. They're actually taught, and I think this is in the mass, but they're taught for 18 years that their entire core being is based upon not crying, on not wearing anything pink, on not being weak. So they base it in reaction to rejecting everything that is feminine, and then somehow they're magically supposed to view women as full human beings. I think it's an impossibility. I call it the great setup. There's no way that our boys can grow up in this culture and not be this way, at least to a certain extent. So at the end of the day, I think it's really instructive too to imagine if you're a boy and you're raised in this culture and you are told that it is your rightful place to be dominant, are you going to give that up? Or are you going to perform that you've given it up and be a feminist man who then really doesn't give it up? You're still benefiting from it in a variety of ways. I think that's what we're up against. And if we recognize the depths of this and the fact that it is the oldest form of oppression, it has been around for thousands of years. And what it likes to do is morph and shift so that you can't see it anymore. So we have a gentler, kinder type of patriarchy, which is what I think we're living in now. I think if we don't acknowledge what we're up against, we're actually not going to be able to address it.
We're depressed.
That was so awesome. But can I also add that, and please feel free to take the mic from me, Caroline, on this research, but there's studies out that the more media girls consume, the more insecure they are, the lower their self-worth and sense of power and ability, and the more media boys watch, the more confident and aggressive they are in their behavior. And I'm totally not getting the study correct. But you've talked about, in Mask, you talked about the American Psychological Study, which sort of has been covered up in a sense. I'm not saying you said that, but just with the more violent media boys consume, the less empathic they are. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Yes. I don't want to get it wrong.
Yes, no, you're getting it absolutely right. So the more violent media and content boys watch, the more likely they are to embrace violent attitudes, the more likely they are to engage in violent behaviors. The more that within the first 3 minutes of opening a magazine, a girl's self-esteem starts to plummet. We also, internalize this idea of being a sex object. So we learn from media. I would just add too that there are two studies that have come out in recent years that look at what happens in the brain when you view women as sex objects. So a couple things happen. The first is that the part of the brain that lights up when you're going to go grab a tool and use it, that lights up when you see a sexually objectified woman. So we view her as a tool. The second thing, and that was a study for men, heterosexual men specifically, but the second study is men and women alike, and we actually view women as a collection of body parts rather than a full human being when we see an objectified woman. So there are profound effects that we are internalizing at an unconscious level when we view media that's harmful and damaging and stereotypical.
You know, if there's ever a time for this conversation, it is now, because between gun violence and Me Too, and if we're not looking at why this is happening with men and boys, we're never going to get to a solution. So I think we need to, and you know, not to mention who's, you know, president of the United States, and are we're seeing modeled there for our boys. So we have to, like, really, I think this is probably, it's funny how this keeps coming up. This is such an important part of the conversation, is talking about men and boys. So I'm really glad that it's coming up. And we all have a role, I think, in supporting media and talking, you know, as parents, we have opportunities, as educators, we have opportunities. I think it really is about being proactive. I'm going to definitely, what I wanted to ask a question to Brenda, and I also want to say that, like, when we're having this conversation also about gender equality and women in media, we're also talking about diversity. That's the other piece of this. This always has to include the conversation about diversity. So I want to ask Brenda, why is change in terms of the diversification of, you know, in media, of gender, of race, and other classifications so hard in Hollywood and beyond?
You know, part of it is, this is really, to me, a debate about affirmative action and its application, and just understanding why those policies were even put in place. You know, there's a saying, when the playing field is even and the goals are clear and the rules are public and the referees are fair, everyone wins, right? You see this in sports. It's like the great equalizer. If life were that way, things would be a lot different. And so for me, you think about just historically why women are in the position they're in, minorities. You know, it's really, it's a misapplication of that concept. And this, to me, is the reason why we continue to not achieve, because people overanalyze how it's applied, or it's abused even. And I was a student at the University of Michigan. We were going through the lawsuits where the school was sued because they were accused of applying quotas. And that discredits the argument for everyone. You know, we have the test scores, the grades. Women, you know, most of them probably were smarter coming in. But women being the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action, actually, it's not minorities, it's women. You know, there's a stigma, you know, that we sort of got extra points, and this is how we got there. And so everything we've achieved is discounted because of this misinterpretation and misapplication of a benign concept. It's just about opening the door, not skipping steps, just letting me be at the table in the first place.
So my question is, you know, what will it take to get more women in positions of leadership and power in the media and entertainment world, if that's what it's going to take to help make change?
So I think what I said earlier, right? It's equal pay, it's addressing the wealth gap, so it's financial literacy, it's childcare, it's flex time, it's it's paid leave so that men are taking care of the kids while you're off shooting that film, directing that film, writing that film. It's the pipelines to leadership at the agencies. It's mandating diversity and inclusion from the top. So I know one of my friends is here from William Morris Endeavor, is doing really cool work, just raising, I think, consciousness at WME. ICM is committed to 50-50 by 2020 in terms of leadership at the echelons, at the top echelon of leadership and in the C-suite, and that's critical. So it's really got to be a priority from the top, just as there's got to be grassroots pushing up from the bottom. But again, it's not going to happen unless those at the top recognize it and value it and actually go out of their way to ensure a diverse and inclusive workforce. And I think it also starts with behind the camera. Like, if you don't really invest in women storytellers, writers, and directors, you're going to not have representative stories on screen, and the portrayals of women are going to be limited and misrepresentative, and therefore we just perpetuate this negative cycle of misrepresentations and underrepresentations. So it's systemic change, and we all have to be a part of it, and we all have to commit to do our part in it. And I mean, Sundance is here. You guys have done an incredible job for female directors. It's obviously easier as a documentary filmmaker to make a documentary because there's less funding, but I will tell you, that there's still less funding for women making documentaries than there are for men making documentaries, period. It's just the way it is. The system, we still don't invest in women. We don't believe that women are as talented and capable as they are. We don't see them as, you know, masterful as they are. And so it's really like a cultural shift, it's a mind shift, it's a hearts shift. And it starts with each of us individually, and it starts with the institutions separately and collectively making a commitment and pledging to get to 50-50 by a certain date. And I think you take that step before, which is getting to that tipping point, which is 30%, and then you get to the next level. But it's possible, and I want to see it in my lifetime, and we're going to fight for it in our lifetime, but it requires all of us working together.
So I know we're running a little short on time, so I'll talk like an auctioneer. I think there's a broader issue of women's leadership, right? And then there's the issue of women's leadership in Hollywood. The broader issue of women's leadership, we tend to think of it as a glass ceiling where we're all equal and then we get to the top and we can't bust through. But Alice Eagley's research for 30 years has shown us that actually it's not that. It's more, the better metaphor is a labyrinth, that it actually starts at a very young age. We discourage girls from leadership positions, we encourage boys. And that discouragement and encouragement comes from family, from peers. We internalize ideas that we are not as competent, and that has a lot to do with the fact that women are evaluated differently for leadership. So the exact same evaluation, the exact same performance will get a different performance evaluation once you get into a position of leadership. And again, Alice Eagley's research on role incongruity, a big word which really just means that the things that we associate with women do not fit well with what we associate with leadership. So even though women are capable, strong, leaders who produce and in fact are better for the bottom line, if you look at corporate board composition, and female CEOs actually do better financially, we still have this common understanding that they're not as capable. So it's a labyrinth. We have to start when girls are very little. In Hollywood, it is an issue of where I don't think we're going to make change and without a big fight. And I will tell you, the fight's been going on for so long, and I just put down some, so it's a civil rights issue, right? It's a Title VII, it's a workplace discrimination issue where that industry has not been in compliance for the half century that we've been pushing for it to be in compliance. The EEOC, the government agency that enforces Title VII and says, yes, you have to have non-discriminatory workplace hiring practices, investigated in 1969, found both race and gender discrimination. The industry did nothing in response. Again, in 1978, the industry did nothing in response. In the 1980s, and that was 82 and 84, 2 more investigations, nothing happened because the federal government didn't really put teeth behind it. The DGA filed a class action lawsuit in the 1980s. In 2014, the ACLU filed another class action lawsuit, and they're currently under investigation. So we need lawsuits, we need federal complaints, we need these sorts of discussions right here. We also need consumer pressure. I think it's the biggest unharnessed power yet. 85% of purchasing power is in the hands of women. We have very few tools for consumer activism. I'll make a plug for an app called Grade My Movie that was inspired by misrepresentation. It's the only app where it gives a grade for race and gender, the top 6 positions, 3 on the screen, 3 behind the scenes. You can look at it from Wednesday night for the weekend coming up, and then you can put your money where your consumer dollars, where your conscience is, because it gives grades for, again, both race and gender for movies that are opening this weekend. So that's grademymovie.com. But consumer power, lawsuits, these sorts of forums, transparency, and also federal complaints, I think, are the only way we're going to shift an industry that is the epitome of a good old boys club because of the way in which informal networks run Hollywood.
Is this how it is working? I wanted to end on call to action. That was a really inspiring call to action. I want to give Brenda and Jen an opportunity. What is the call to, and then we will open for questions, the call to action that you would want to issue to?
Well, I want to point out one interesting thing that came out this week from the Pew Center. We talk about women stepping up into leadership positions, wherever that is. This was specifically in the political context, but they released the results of a survey that said, 61% of the population thinks it's a great idea that more women are stepping up to run. Why did anyone say that wasn't a good idea is the question. When you look at congressional candidates, 37% of those surveyed thought that women being in Congress would be a great influence over our government and policy. And 7 or 10% said it would be a bad idea. 53% said it would make no difference at all. Why is that happening? Why is there still any segment of the population that doesn't think this is great? When you look at women stepping up into leadership positions, you know, we can assume that there will be major policy changes impacted by the things that matter to them, whether it's, you know, paid maternity leave or abortion rights or anything that this is how we all lead. You know, we take the things that impact us. This is how we choose people. This is how we work together. You know, there are 3 types of people that you do business with: who you know, who you like, and who you have to. And that's kind of like how life works. And so you see this in every industry sort of trickling down. So what is the call to action? It's back to, it really is that mentality shift. It starts at home. It starts with giving 2 of the same, you know, 2 Barbies and not 1. It's teaching people that, you know, women can lead and that this can be you. It's the media and corporations taking their responsibility seriously, recognizing that business imperative and the moral imperative to actually shape the way we think. It always goes back to that for me. How we think is how we act, is how we are, is how we see ourselves, and how society continues on.
Well, aside from all of the policies that I would encourage us to adopt as a society and to practice in the various institutions in which we work, you know, follow us, you know, on Twitter, social media, your Facebook, Instagram with What Will It Take to Represent Her. Share the video when it comes out. Follow the Representer campaign. Just get engaged. Read Marianne's book, and watch The Mask You Live In with the men in your life. I think it's a really gentle, loving, empathetic introduction to a patriarchal socialization that is harming not just our boys and men, but society at large. And keep talking about all of this, and keep raising your voices, and keep demanding that your stories be heard, and that your stories be shared, and that your stories be told. And don't accept no as an answer, and find your allies and your friends who will have your back and will go on this journey with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Ellen, where are you? First of all, this is truly, truly at the core of what is and is not happening. And it's moving me emotionally because in playing female leaders on television for the past 15 years, I have been all over the world talking to women about what it is that is either present or absent in these roles. And I know that what is absent is exactly what you're talking about, which is the perception of that as being natural and empowered to begin with. So I'm going around the world talking to people who are relating to me like I'm some kind of precious object. I'm simply an actress who was given a good part. But the projection and the need for women to understand that they can be leaders is it's so palpable and paramount to our very existence, so that your son starts to have a different view. And it isn't too late for your son. It's not even nearly too late because we're all married. Well, some of us are, to men who've been around for a long time and watched them change. And I mean that sincerely. But anyway, so just briefly, sorry. I feel that one of the reasons I was placed in these roles is because I was raised in a family of women. I had 5 sisters. Our father insisted we were competitors. He threw us into the lake when we were 4 and said, learn how to swim because it's the only sport that women could compete in. I've been around for a while. Thank God things have changed. But there was something in the nature of my upbringing that taught me something about competing with men. Now, that's not the whole story, and that's not why we're here. But it gave me something at my core that a lot of female artists do not have of my generation. And so I would encourage everyone to talk to their daughters about the thing that happens inside of them when they understand themselves as a winner in whatever they project, because it is a competitive society that we're raising them in, and there's no way to get around the fact that not understanding winning and losing as a core value that you have is going to, if you don't understand that in this society for a very long time, you can't depart from it to become more than that. That's how I feel. And I think that's why, part of why I ended up in these roles. To answer your question, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I realize that we have a lot of questions, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I want to say, like, this is the beginning. There's more conversations we have. I'm going to do another event. So please reach out, sign up to the What Will It Take mailing list. Follow all of these amazing people and organizations, and I'm really hoping that we can continue these conversations. I know for me, in what's going on in the world, this is how I find my hope and my light and get up in the morning, is having these conversations and feeling the energy that there's more conversations like this going on, so that if we can just all keep talking and working together and supporting each other, like, I really believe this is a paradigm shifting moment because people are awake. And that's a good thing. And it's messy. We've got messy conversations to have. We need to have them. But I felt really hopeful. And a lot of it is because of the incredible panelists I have, all of you that are here. So thank you all so much. Looking forward to staying in touch.